Hi, my name is Ryan Naylor. I'm the health and physical education teacher here at the Montgomery School, and I will be covering my media questions, the 6 questions that have to do with Mrs. Wynn's firing, with the help of co-teacher Liz. So, first question.
Do you agree with the school district that Mrs. Wint should have been fired? Why do you feel that way?
Overall, I believe my answer would be yes. If we look according to the letter of the law, she did violate the bylaws using the word vagina out of a health education standpoint. Using what I would say, quote unquote, sensitive language with young students, especially eighth graders, can be a touchy subject, even outside a health context. No matter how much you preface it, in her case, she was making sure that the students weren't using it inappropriately, that nothing had to do with her particular topic. I still believe, honestly, that if you were to look at the letter of the law, she did violate it. She didn't speak with an administrator about the fact that this was in her content area. It didn't follow specifically what art history had to do with in their curriculum. And it's very difficult, I think, to understand how the human brain works and then how, in turn, eighth graders are going to respond to that. So, yes, overall, I feel that Mrs. Wynn should have been fired based on the school's bylaws.
What would you say to parents who believe that Miss Wint or no other school teacher should use the word vagina?
First of all, I would assure parents that using the word vagina in a health education context is perfectly acceptable. You're dealing with an anatomical part of the female body, and using that to describe the reproductive system is perfectly legal. I would also make sure that the parents are assured that the use of the word vagina, especially in this situation, does not reflect the views of the school itself or the school district, making sure that you understand those two things are separate. Uh, what I do see is if a parent, if I am worried about something specifically in class or in context, the way that the bylaws are written in this particular scenario, anyone that feels uncomfortable based on a religious view or belief can submit a written letter to be excused from that class. In this situation, it was not the case because this was not part of curriculum, so parents would have really no idea what's going on here. But I do agree that in some scenarios, possibly using just the word genitalia rather than using the word vagina, if you wanted to use female genitalia to compare that, might be a better way to go rather than just using the word vagina.
Do you agree with Miss Wint that the regulation of the use of the word vagina in public schools is a very antiquated notion of what is and is not appropriate?
I agree with her that a conversation about this does need to be started based on whether or not it is a word appropriate for any education outside health education. Uh, Even if the way Georgia O'Keeffe's work is compared, if, like I said before, there are other ways in which to use the word or get that same message across rather than using the word vagina. Like I said, for eighth graders, I personally teach eighth graders. It's very difficult to understand where everyone's level of maturity is at and whether or not that is something that an individual may or may not be able to handle. I think that her work is something that could be very useful to art history, but making sure that they're not overstepping your bounds. I think it's very easy just to err on the side of caution, especially in an incident like this, and especially going forward. You would have to agree, at least for the school, would possibly have to put a clause in understanding that that type of language would have to be given permission by an administrator before actually being given.
Should the word vagina only be allowed to be used in reproductive health courses in public schools?
In my professional opinion, as of right now, it's an easy yes. Reproductive health has always used the word vagina specifically, like I said before, for the female reproductive system. That's one where you can easily justify the word being used. I think in a progressive culture, which we are right now, the nature of the internet and being online and things being desensitized, I think at some point we can use it in a respectful way, but if we're talking about eighth graders right now, again, we're talking about a maturity level where they're just learning what sex education is. It's very difficult to go forward with that. And so right now, I think mainstream is to use it just specifically for sex education.
Do you believe Miss Went when she said that the use of the word vagina was about art history and Georgia O'Keeffe and not done as a part of some other liberal feminist agenda?
Ultimately, I want to believe that her intentions were pure, that it was not part of a feminist agenda. You really always want to err on the side of believing a teacher. Unless you were a fly on the wall and you could understand what was going on in that particular setting, knowing what was in the class, it's really difficult to be able to tell that. When knowing that the two eighth graders were somewhat affected by it, so that they had to go and talk to the principal the day after, does show that it brought up some sort of controversy. Ultimately, I think that by her not checking, she's not erring on the side of caution. It's always easier to run by something and check on that beforehand. But for her to incorporate materials that are beneficial to the students, I think that was her ultimate goal. And I think she tried to do that, but possibly just didn't think of the consequences or ramifications before that.
Given the school policy, what changes would you recommend to ensure that this type of behavior would be handled more appropriately in the future?
The first addendum I would make regarding the bylaws would be to address the responsibility for teachers to be given the okay by an administrator before using subject that could be used or seen as controversial. Ultimately, like I said before, err on the side of caution so that you're not running into an issue such as this. If in this particular scenario, the administrators, hopefully they looked into the backstory. They said that this was not the only reason that she was fired and that there were a multitude of other things. But I think even in this scenario that the administrator should have looked further into this, other than just asking her a question, giving her a chance to defend herself and understanding why she used the word that she did. But ultimately, moving forward, this is how new laws are refined, refreshed, and taken forward. When an incident like this happens, it's a chance for the laws to be further fleshed out so that there are really no gray areas. In here, I feel like they covered a lot of that for the language, but they didn't cover where or not it could be used throughout the whole. My biggest issue so far with that is that they didn't show any responsibility of what the teachers are to do with new material rather than just using the word in a health education standpoint. For these questions, I hope that you enjoyed getting a chance to hear my opinion. If you have any comments about things that may need to be changed or said, I'd appreciate them just below this. Thank you so much.